So with this question that we have here, we want to save $20,000 over 5 years to buy a house. You might be thinking that's not really enough to buy a house, which I would agree in probably 90%, 98% of the cases. But that's more for your down payment. You need to have some sort of lump sum upfront to show that you can save money and determine your interest rate. And then from there, you can kind of go into your interest payments and buying your house. So we'll talk about all of that, down payments, how all of that works with the project, but that's where that's coming from. So that actually is a pretty reasonable number. Now we want to figure out how much money we need to deposit into an annuity that is 6% compounded monthly in order to save the desired amount. So it's not really written in the question. We're going to want to figure out how much money we deposit monthly. So we want to figure out how much we have to put into this annuity monthly in order to achieve $20,000 over 5 years. Annuity, maybe we haven't gone over that term. That is just an account that you continue to pay the same amount into. So that's all that means is, oh, okay, like I have a set amount, I'm going to pay that set amount every time for 5 years or even for a lifetime. Some annuities go on for a lifetime. So with all that in mind, now I have my calculator or my formula. I put in my A is that's the future value. That's how much I want to save. I want to save 20,000 over 5 years. My rate is 6%, so 0.06. It's compounded monthly. That's where the 12 comes from. And then finally, over 5 years, so the T is equal to 5. I put all of that information in there, plug it into my calculator. I see that I need to be saving $287 per month. Now, the question that a lot of people ask when we're dealing with these home loan type of things is, oh, how much of that money was actually coming from interest versus how much of that money was happening if I just kind of tucked away my the same amount into kind of a coffee tin or something like that. So to figure that out, we say, okay, I put in $287 every month. I did that for 5 years. So, okay, well, if I do 287 times 12 times 5, this is very much like what we did with the cups of coffee question 2 sections ago. So I multiply all of these together. I find out how much I've actually put into the bank account at $17,220. And now I just subtract the two. Okay, well, my account had $20,000 in it. I put $17,220 into it. So the amount that came from interest is $2,780. Now this last thing, again, I don't see it coming up on the project, and maybe there will be 1 or 2 questions in my math lab about it. I just find it interesting because I didn't really know a whole lot about the stock market before teaching this course. So I figured it's worth at least talking about for a couple of minutes. So when you see stock tickers, or like when you're looking at the stocks in the paper, this is a pretty common table that you will see that just have all of this information compiled in kind of a small thing with acronyms and abbreviations that might not make a lot of sense when you see them the first time. But actually pretty much every piece outside of one thing is fairly intuitive. So the first 2 things, you might be able to kind of make an assumption about what they mean. 52-week high is that over the last 52 weeks, what's the highest amount that your stock was valued at, and what was the lowest amount that your stock was valued at. So if this has a very big difference between the 2, it's a pretty volatile stock, and it will shoot up and down a lot, and you might want to watch it pretty frequently and figure out when's the best time to get rid of it. If the difference between the 2 is pretty small, that means it's not kind of jumping around so much. Stock is the company name. Again, you probably could have gathered that. The symbol is that if you sometimes even stock tickers get even less or more brief, and they just have the symbol and then kind of maybe the net change or the close or something like that. So every company that's on the stock market has a symbol. FedEx's symbol is just FDX. And dividends refers to the amount of money that people paid per share So that means that if you had so dividend refers to how good the stock's been to the stockholders. So it tells you how much money you have earned per share or how much money you've lost per share. So the dividend here is 0.44. That means that if you've owned 100 shares of FedEx, you would have earned $44 over the past year. Percent yield, this is where things start to get a little bit trickier, is that kind of the same concept of dividends, except for now we're just talking about a percentage. So your dividends, you earn 44 cents per share. The percent yield tells you, well, whatever you bought your stock for, this is the percentage that it has gained, that it has yield over the year, or loss. You can have a negative yield as well. Volumes in hundreds, this just means how many that shares were traded yesterday, and since it's the stock market, a lot of stocks tend to get traded, so instead of just writing out the entire number, it writes out the entire number that was shared times 100 essentially. The high is the highest point from yesterday, and the low is the lowest point from yesterday, so that is what kind of shows up most often on those abbreviated tickers. Again, big difference means that that stock's very volatile, it'll bounce around. Small difference means it's not going to change that much, at least it didn't within the last day. Closing price is what it closed at the previous day. So maybe if you're halfway through the financial day, it might not be that amount, but that is what it ended the previous day once the market closed. Net change is also not too terrible. Net change is just in comparison to what happened yesterday, how much did we lose? So apparently the day before, the stock decreased by $1.60, so it lost money overall. Okay, so now probably the most difficult thing to understand on a stock table is what PE stands for, and it stands for price to earnings ratio. And so this is a good indication of how well a company is doing, and it's pretty similar to dividends. The difference is dividends is how much you are actually going to be getting out of your stocks. So it doesn't completely take into account how much a company is earning, it's just taking into account how much a company is actually paying out to its stock holders, versus the price to earnings ratio, or the PE, or the annual earnings per share, actually more accurate. Used a lot of things there. The annual earnings per share tells you how much the company actually made. So PE gives you a ratio that on its own isn't super helpful, but you can use it to figure out your annual earnings per share by taking your closing price and dividing it by your PE ratio. So in this case, our annual earnings per share for FedEx would be, you take your closing price, 44.08, you divide it by your 19, and you get your annual earnings per share to be $2.32. And now what the PE ratio does tell you is that the yesterday's closing price is 19 times greater than the earnings per share. So that also is another advantage, is it kind of takes into account how much each individual stock was. It gives you that ratio of how much the stock was versus how much the stock actually earned. So in this case, the 44, that closing amount, 44.08, is 19 times greater than the amount that the company actually earned over the last year per stock.